You can have 100 million impressions of a Super Bowl ad and yet get zero ROI because those eyeballs don't mean anything.
If you don't have the right creative, you're lost. That insight and culture piece is the input into that creative.
We maps over 70,000 brains, over 30,000 plus hours of brain activity correlating to video content.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Brandformance. Today, I have my namesake on this podcast. Pranav Yadav is the CEO of Neuro-Insight, an entrepreneur and a thought leader with tons of experience in applying neuroscience principles to advertising and marketing. He's a recognized leader, having been named a Forbes 30 under 30, an Ad Age 40 under 40, an AMA 4 under 40 awardee, and an AD Week Young Influential. So let's dive straight in. We're going to kick this off. So first off, we first have to talk about, well, this is the first podcast episode with a namesake. So this is a very exciting and special moment. And I have followed your journey for many, many years, Pranav. And I want to start with something that I think many of us get wrong in marketing, which is how do we actually even define what marketing is? There's a lot of semantic issues in this field. And I think you have a really special way of describing the landscape of marketing and brand and measurement and all of these topics that often get confused and conflated. So let's start there, and then we'll get into the neuroscience and some of the more spicier takes, which I'm sure our audience would love. So over to you.
Will do. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It is also my first podcast with a namesake. And I have also followed your journey for many, many years. Have had the good fortune of seeing it for a little over 2 decades. So, it gives me immense pleasure and pride, to see everything that you've done and accomplished, including, what you're doing right now. So, as you know, I don't come from the world of marketing. But I do like to look at everything in life from first principles. And my first understanding of what brand is came from my time at Goldman Sachs, where I worked on the trading floor. And oftentimes you'd look at companies and you'd look at where they're trading at, and you realize this is the market capital of the company. But of course, the only thing where how to value something is in terms of these are the assets of the company and these are the discounted cash flows, et cetera, et cetera. But oftentimes there's a remarkable delta between what a company owns and is capable of producing. And it's even more vivid in today's landscape in what's happening in the markets with the AI company and the market cap of that company. So what is that delta, right? That delta is a story, a story around what is possible, a story that people believe in, a story that people buy into, much like, our identities, much like our, national identities in terms of being the nation state, much like a religion. A brand is a story that people either buy into or do not buy into, but a story that believes a truth that people live by. And so that is brand to me, the delta between what you can actually put down a hard value to and where the market values it on the other. And actually, by the way, oftentimes it can work the other way as well. For example, you're producing a remarkable amount of cash and in fact have future validity for your work, and yet the market capitalization of that idea is less than that. That means your brand is a negative story that people actually want to disassociate from or do not believe. So it works both ways, but I think that delta between the imagination or the belief of the story that the brand puts out and the actual value of other things is the brand. And marketing is the growth engine that enables not just brand, but be able to actually, it's also includes the craft of being able to get to the basics of the right person with the right message at the right time for them to actually either believe or not believe in the story. The story comes later, but the access point in creating that connection between two parties to be able to even communicate this story is the craft of marketing.
What you just did wonderfully was tie the tangible pieces, which is, you talked about the valuation, the market cap, to the intangible pieces, which is the story and the delta between what is, maybe perceived in the market and what it can be or what it will be in the future. That's a wonderful way of looking at brand. I think that more marketers need to understand, and more generally executives need to understand how to tie these two things together, even though they might be very different disciplines, right? We put storytelling and narrative and brand building in this like one part of our minds, and then we put all the financial metrics in this other part of our mind, when in reality, those two things are very interlinked. So I love that. You said something about also the right thing at the right time to the right person, right? The right message to the right person to the right time. I often struggle with that personally because of this natural issue in marketing and storytelling that, hyper-personalization, hyper-targeting, which some people will perceive your statement to be, doesn't work, right? So am I misunderstanding what you're saying there? Like, are you saying that, hey, you need to get really hyper personalized and hyper targeted with, you got to get the right message to the right person at that time. And if you miss your opportunity, everything's gone. I don't think that's what you're saying, but I want to dig into that. What's your actual take there?
I'm so glad you raised that, because I sit on the exact opposite spectrum of the people who double click on that hyper personalization piece. I think the hyper personalization people are people who are driven by tactics and actually do not understand how humans work. Going back to what actually changed humanity to begin with is our ability to get a collective to believe in a story that can actually create common ideology, common ideas, common action points. One of the core points when Yuval Noah Harari talks about, in his book *Sapiens*, is that what allowed us to conquer the entire planet was to coordinate with large groups of people across large geographies. There were other animals that actually coordinated amongst large groups, but they couldn't do geography. So this 2x2 matrix allowed us to be able to do that. And because so much of marketing does need to participate in outwardly behavior, social flexing, what you want to stand for in an outwardly fashion as well, on top of inward looking, you actually, hyper-personalization takes away from a common story. There's a thing that someone can talk about in terms of sensitivities towards our mothers for both you and me, that is personal to both of us, and yet an archetypical, human behavior. So personal does not mean individual for every individual. Personal could be personal for an entire group of people. And I think marketing needs to actually understand the underlying core of people, of understanding a core human truth that exists beneath the surface of the tactical. Yeah, of course, if I went to a certain person's concert, this past weekend, then the merch for that concert, that personalization I understand. But actually trying to understand that everybody who went to that concert, likes this one particular song because they all heard it during a particular heartbreak. And heartbreak is what we need the balm for you to then wrap it around in a story that addresses that. That is personalization at scale. So it doesn't need to be done at a hyper individual level.
That's such a clarifying thought, and it's a deep point. So I hope every marketer who's listening is paying attention to this, because I was listening to Eye of the Tiger this weekend while lifting weight, and it's the same notion, right? That, hey, I'm correlating that song with probably where I first heard it. Was it the Rocky movies? I don't know. Like, somehow I think that those two are related, and I'm like, hey, I was having a tough week. I would want to lift this weight and like get through to the next level. Like, all of these things are related. It's personal, but it's not individualized. Like, that's exactly the point. And humans crave that common storytelling that, because there's, so on this point, we're going to go on a tangent, because there is a world of there is this sort of alternative reality that some people are spinning up right now that we are all going to have with AI, hyper personalized, individualized, storytelling. You're going to interact with movies and you're going to, go down these different paths. And I'm like scratching my head and going like, isn't that the antithesis of what movie going is? Because we all want to watch that movie together and watch that show together and talk about it, right? So I'm completely on the same page with you about this. I know you went on a tangent. I'm going to bring this back. Okay. So with that definition of, brand and marketing, one of the things that I think about often is how you describe attention metrics being a scam. And we're going to start to like come towards where, you all play at Neuro-Insight. So talk to me about why attention metrics are measured the way that they are and why are they a scam, and what is the alternative for brands that are, putting out these stories in market?
Beautiful. So when your mother said to you, Pranav, pay attention, what did she mean? Did she mean, Pranav, just look here? Or did she mean that, Pranav, look here, listen to what I'm saying, understand what I'm saying, and then do what this word actually means according to your understanding, which I want to align with my understanding?
Sure.
It wasn't just the former, right? Just look at me. It was all of the. So the meaning of the word attention as we understand it is that all of those things that your mom wanted from that word, pay attention, or pay attention in class, or pay attention to this, except all of what marketing measures when it comes to attention is whether or not my eyeballs are looking at you or not. So I just face this way, right? You're in my peripheral vision. I have this beautiful view of Soho, New York right now. The sun is shining, the birds are chirping, and there's no better time to be alive. And yet, I can actually, in my peripheral vision, see you smile. You were smiling, right? That, by attention metrics, is not captured as my attention to what you were doing. And yet, my brain is actually capable of processing a lot more. So, the reason why people invented attention metrics was this. Throughout the history of media measurement, the only thing that was ever measured was number of impressions. When you threw the newspapers around, you were like, oh, how many did we distribute? When TV came about, again, how many cable connections did we have? Then we invented the internet, and then, of course, it all became like how many impressions, likes, or whatever it may be. But we actually always failed to measure the quality of impact of an impression, which everybody's always known that the quality of impact of an impression is where the game is at. You can have 100 million impressions of a Super Bowl ad that you spend $20 million on, and yet get zero ROI because those eyeballs don't mean anything. Can I curse on your podcast?
You can. You absolutely can. Go for it.
And I was gonna say that doesn't mean shit, right? And we've known that, and therefore the same media companies invented this thing. Oh, we have attention, and the word attention means what the understanding of what your mother said to you, and actually yet we're only measuring it with eyeballs. So why I think they're a scam is because, of course, many times you need to be able to look at something to begin to actually engage with the thing. Not all times, but even if 100% of the times you engage with something visually to get to the next step, that thing alone doesn't mean anything at all. It is actually just a qualifier of reach. It is not a qualifier of the quality of engagement. And therefore, all it should do is revise reach numbers rather than it becoming a definer of the quality of engagement. And I think that's where people get it wrong, and it's a scam.
Okay, that makes complete sense. So qualifier of reach is the right framing. I completely agree with that, right? So it's like, okay, did you reach them or not? But then what is the, so given what I do and what I've learned over the last 5 years, right? We have MMM and testing, and there's a place for those things. There's a way to do all of those things. But getting to true understanding of attention, of what's happening in somebody's brain, let's talk about that. How do you all achieve that? And how do you actually sort of differentiate it or explain it to a CMO who may not, or a brand leader or a media buyer who may not have ever done that in their life. So let's talk about sort of what Neuro-Insight does, and let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, sure. So first, we start with first principles, right? Like we are nothing but a construct of experiences that we have had in life, right? All of our learning that comes from outside of generational things, which is real, right? Generational trauma, generational wisdom, they can all be real things, but most of what we end up becoming in life, it's essentially learned behavior through the experiences that we have in life. Now, if I were to ask you things that you did in Singapore in high school, you may not be able to actually articulate to me vividly what actually happened when you landed from India to Singapore or Singapore to here. And yet at the same time, those slight nuances are in your accent, your slight nuances in the likings of your food type, etc. The slight, expressions on how you lean over a little bit to give the other person comfort, take into account all of those experiences that you've had in life. In fact, that's how we do everything. 90% of all of our decision making takes place in the subconscious. It's the set of experiences and memories that you have in your life that inform your behavior. You have a small set of, part of the brain that deals with the conscious awareness of a current situation. And it basically makes you feel like you're in control of the situation. Whereas if, much like any computer, the hard disk is 1 terabyte and the RAM is 16, gigs, what's happening is in this computer too, you have the entire operating system sitting on the hard disk and all the other memories sitting on the hard disk. And you use this little bit of RAM right now to conduct this little interaction. Yeah. That's exactly how your brain is structured. But if all you ever access is the RAM to get an understanding of the entire hard disk, you're completely mistaken. So what we do at Neuro-Insight is, if the premise that 90% of all decision making takes place in the subconscious is true, which has been true in the past 5,000 years of philosophy and has been true in the past 100 years of neuroscience, then we needed a tool that would actually give us a window into what is happening subconsciously versus getting access to the conscious behavior, which is self-reported behavior. Behavioral stuff is actually still reflective of the subconscious activity. So if you're studying that, that's giving you a window into that. But purely asking people questions on whether you like this or not, whether you will buy this product or not, what do you like about this? If I were to frame this argument this way, would it be more compelling? Though that rational conscious response is not reflective of in-market behavior. So we invented a brain mapping technology where we stick electrodes on people's heads. We don't ask them any questions. We see which parts of the brain light up at what moment. We then essentially correlate that actual speed of electrical activity on the surface of your scalp to a variety of different physiological things that are happening in your brain, such as what are you creating memories for? What is personally relevant? What is emotionally engaging? Do I have a lean in or a lean back response? These are all things you can actually see in the moment as a person is going through an experience. Like, imagine your brain decides instantly that, hey, by the way, this thing is important enough for my survival. Right. Let me give it the most scarce resource in my brain, which is memory. How this translates into marketing is, if you see an ad for a car, the brand doesn't need you to go buy a car right now. What the brand needs to do is create a memory, a long-term subconscious memory in your brain that if in a year from now, you have the need for a car and the means for a car, that this memory pops up and you basically consider my brand in your purchase decision. And meanwhile, all the stories that I've told around it being a family car, it being, it standing for the right values, it being secure, etc. Now that you have, young children, that's the car you will pick. That's right. The entire game. And so we come and decode that subconscious drivers of motivation.
Okay, that's fascinating. And it makes a lot of sense to me that the only way I used to, before this conversation for the last couple of years, I used to tell people the best attribution is going to be when Elon Musk figures out Neuralink and we can peek into people's brains. It turns out you've already kind of done that. And not in that invasive way, but in a way that's sort of accessible. Now, my question with this is, how confident do you feel, since you've studied this whole subdomain for the last like couple of decades, that you can replicate what happens in a non-lab environment inside of a lab environment? Are there considerations there of, how people would react to a stimulus in their living room versus how they react to a stimulus in, a session with Neuro-Insight? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So I'll make 2 points there. Looks like you made a movie reference earlier. When was the last time you went to a theater to watch a movie?
At least a year, maybe? I don't remember. Yeah.
All right. And if you go back to your best movie watching experiences in a theater, have you ever laughed out loud or cried in a movie theater?
Totally. Yep.
Did you know it was a movie and it was not real?
Oh, good point.
So if your brain chooses to believe in a story and is immersed in that content, it believes everything as if it is experiencing it in that moment, right? So whether or not that is possible in a lab setting to feel and react the same way in a normal setting is proven by that framing, right? You can feel that way. Now, to that extent, if I were to bring you into my facilities, stick the electrodes on you and show an ad, I'm probably not going to get the response that I would get in the market. Why? Because you are like, where the hell am I? Why is there a headset on me? Why am I doing this? So what we do is that even if we're looking at a 30-second ad, for example, or a 15-second ad, or a 5-second one these days, you come through my facilities and essentially go through a 30-minute experience. While we put the headset on, we're showing you your favorite TV shows, you're engaging with content. And now that you're fully immersed in that content, I place in the thing that I actually want to test for. So that the reaction that I'm getting is as naturalistic as it can be in this environment.
Okay, that makes complete sense. So there is a certain amount of recreating that environment so you can get the best possible read. And yeah, that makes complete sense to me. It's very common sense. I appreciate that. How do you, when you talk to brands, like we have a couple of customers in our portfolio who are thinking about doing Super Bowl ads, right? And this is one of the things where I'm like, that's a very sort of make it or break it type of high risk reward type of situation for a CMO to make, right? Especially coming from a tech brand where generally marketers and brand are looked down upon. What would you recommend to a marketing leader who's making such a big push for the first time? How should they use technology like Neuro-Insight? Or are there other ways to get a better read on what's going to work in the market, what's going to resonate before you go commit, $7 million or $8 million, however much it costs to buy a Super Bowl ad?
Man, I mean, great question. I mean, there have been years where 20% of all Super Bowl advertising kind of went through our system. So this is...
Whoa, 20%? That's a lot.
Yeah. So this is something like we're well immersed in. So the basics of whether or not a story will resonate with people at that scale or not is an easy test for us. And I think everybody must begin there. And by the way, a decade ago, doing that with us alone was actually enough, which it is not enough anymore. Because the context in which the Super Bowl is received today has changed compared to a decade ago, right? A decade ago, the situation was fairly fixed. They were viewing experiences with a group of people. And in that, people forget some very normal things. If I'm watching something in a group setting versus as an individual, then the values I need to draw on are actually group values rather than individual values. Side note or tangent, if you look at the kind of content produced pre-COVID and post-COVID, like I crave Adam Sandler type not silly, but like goofy comedies. Like I want that kind of content. It is not produced anymore. It used to be produced because people like us used to go in groups, watch that kind of work with our friends and actually appreciate it. Even if you were to actually get an AI to do a visual by visual analysis, the general tonality of a screen is darker. We are producing not just darker content metaphorically, we are actually producing content to be seen in a bigger screen at home, independently, inward looking rather than an outward looking stuff, right? So the context in which you view content matters and changes how you will perceive that content. the context of the Super Bowl has always been a group setting.
Right.
And so if we're not focusing on, if you're going to make an emotional push, it has to be an emotion that resides with all of us. If you have to make a comic push, it has to be a comedy that is understandable between that group of people. If it relies on subtle joke telling in a loud room, I'm going to miss it. So it has to be obvious. So there are actually some very basic things that are common sense that you'd actually be shocked and surprised as to how easily they're ignored.
Yeah.
Then, of course, there's that entire thing of like people like, oh, I spent $7-8 million to buy media and I $7-8 million to produce this. Now, will I get my value in that one-time exposure? So let me pre-release this ad so that people get to see it beforehand. But do you have that uncle in your family who tells the same joke every time you meet them?
Yep.
And there are uncles whose jokes land better every time because the joke has the maturity and the complexity to grow and for you to wait to actually get to the punchline. And actually the way he laughs makes you laugh.
Yep.
That is the same thing with advertising. And there are times when you meet these people who are telling you the same story over and over again and we're like, I'm done with this, right?
Yeah.
So repetition of an idea has that nuance. And so if you're going to have the strategy of releasing your Super Bowl ad to begin with, then make sure it has the nuance for it to actually have a different value because now someone has seen it in the Instagram feed in an individual setting. So it needs to resonate there and it needs to resonate there. So what did you do to do that, to that content? And by the way, the best Super Bowl campaigns are the ones where it is a continuation of a story of an idea that's being put to like a certain kind of pedestal or a conclusion or, a certain kind of complexity of moment. So people are bought into that story from a much longer time. So those are basic tactics. But of course, can we look at an idea and tell you whether or not it resonates with people or not? And more importantly, even if you were able to create a fantastic story with fantastic memory and engagement, maybe your brand is not coming at a time where there is engagement in the story, which is actually the biggest pitfall in all Super Bowl advertising. People spend so much money on it and get a lot of creative people on it. So they are able to nail the story more or less. But actually the nuance of good advertising versus good creative is that the creative connects ideas that were not connected beforehand, is able to engage people with that idea. This ad has the additional responsibility to make sure that the brand becomes, or the call to action becomes memorable out of this leverage of the story that you've created. So whether or not you are able to do that, and I always use the example of, the Budweiser Clydesdales ads. Outstanding story. I don't know if you've seen this particular one called Lost Dog, where you're on a farm and this guy owns a bunch of horses. He also has a puppy. Now, very cute puppy gets lost one day as it ventures outside, completely gets lost, and now it's dark. And, the puppy meets a bunch of wolves who look at this puppy as if they're going to, demolish this little thing. And the puppy, really squeals a little bit, and it's dark, and the beautiful soundtrack is going on. And suddenly the Clydesdales arrive. And of course, the wolves kind of back off, and they all, like this beautiful, handsome Clydesdales, walk the puppy home. Puppy reunites with the owner, and it's a magical little moment. And after this entire thing is over, and the soundtrack is on the dip, and you've known the story is over, there's a red screen that takes over, and it says Budweiser, right? They created more memory for this ad than 99% of the ads in our database. But the memory created for the brand of Budweiser was in the bottom 10% of everything we've seen.
Wow.
We went into Budweiser to tell them that that's how this would be received, of course, post the Super Bowl. And at that time, it was rated to be the number one ad of that year. In fact, it was rated to be later amongst the top 30 ads in the last 30 years in the Super Bowl. And Budweiser's like, how can you say so confidently that this ad won't sell any beer? We're like, well, because of this. Turns out that's now a public case study that actually they did not see any kind of movement for product because of that one reason.
I mean, that's another banger of a story for any CMO who's going to spend that much money is, the creative storytelling isn't enough, like you said. the advertising piece in that is critical. Hey, folks, thanks for listening to this podcast today. If you're enjoying the show and if you're getting value out of it, we'd really appreciate if you drop us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting app. And so I want to talk about like another point related to this whole thing. I'm sure that Budweiser went and did a whole bunch of pre-testing of this ad. And it tested fantastically, right? So I want to bring this into pre-testing. I've read a little bit about it. I've watched a bunch of content about it. Pre-testing to me feels like that it's the same visual attention piece rather than a memory-based attention sort of analysis. Is that a fair way to think about what pre-testing is and what it achieves? Like, tell me what you think.
Yeah. Well, it's done a few ways. There's the traditional way of pre-testing is bring people in, show them an ad, and ask them how they feel about it, right?
Right.
Ask them, like, if I were to not remind you what this is for, do you remember the brand? Right. And now that if I show you the brand, what do you remember of this? And it's called aided recall and unaided recall. Right. Except you can call it recall all you want. Recall in neuroscience is not based on conscious recall, or it is not reflective of what is saved in your memory. And oftentimes you will miss something that is saved in memory that, did not come out in this, and more misleading because of the short-term nature of having just seen it. Something may be in your RAM, but did not get encoded into a long-term memory. And therefore, you heard the words you wanted to hear, but you actually are not going to see the result in the market. It is a conscious post hoc response, a post-rationalized response of how you felt about something. I don't know, when you're hiring someone, for your company, and I'm going through that process. So if, your audience listening wants to work with me on my cloud, I'm going to throw that out there.
As you should. If anybody's listening and if you haven't heard of Neuro-Insight or Pranav, go check them out. They're doing amazing work and go apply for that job. You're hiring for a chief of staff role, right? Did I remember that correctly? Well, that was already closed.
Covered, yes. But it is a VP in client solutions.
Yes, that's the one I saw on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So when you talk to a person, in that moment that I'm going to either hire this person or not, because you're seeing the qualities that you need in a coworker or not. And yet at the same time, post hoc, when you have to describe it to your team, you basically go down the resume. You basically be like, well, this is the one particular skill I need to see. This is the skill that this person has, etc., etc. That's a post-rationalized version of what the true reason was. I may actually never be able to describe the true reason, but I may sound very intelligent with the post-rationalized analysis. And that's the difference between what pre-testing does. So that's the traditional pre-testing. Of course, there are newer tools to do that. People do A/B testing online, where they throw, two different things and have a call to action and see what triggers a certain kind of reaction. But imagine doing A/B testing for a Super Bowl campaign on a computer screen. If half of our industry is based on the premise that context matters, then what the hell are you doing to begin with using that technique for this particular thing? When we look for a Super Bowl ad, by the way, we set an actual Super Bowl game, and with actual gameplay and actual commentary, and the ads appear in real-time context for us to be able to see, how people would react in that setting. So the traditional pre-testing, and then of course there's this thing called eye tracking, which looks at where the eyeballs look at, which claim the same thing, that they're looking at subconscious behavior. But again, for anybody who uses any logic in life, your eyes are open 16 hours a day, right? They're always receiving information. And if everything or everywhere you were looking was going to impact your behavior, imagine the number of things you were doing. In fact, that would mean that me staring my history book would make you ace my history exam. It is not about the signal that the eye is sending to the brain. It's about what the brain chooses to do with it. So
I love
that's
that
a fundamental difference. Yeah.
If it were that easy, Pranav, right? If it were that easy to just stare at the book. Okay, this is great. I want to maybe cover a practical example. We've covered a lot today, but can you talk about a moment when your tech was able to kind of surface a critical insight for an advertiser, and it changed the kind of trajectory of that particular, campaign or initiative. We covered one, right, which was the Budweiser example, and that became a case study, but that was kind of after the fact. Tell us about another story that comes to mind.
Oh man, there are so many, but I'll give you one particular one and then tell you how that idea extends into other things as well. In this world, when people sit around a room, we go through reasons to believe, right? RTBs.
Yep.
That
We have some written down for Paramark. Yep.
exactly. And we basically think that my only problem in the world is the world truly doesn't know that I solved these specific problems for them. And when I go out to them and tell them that this is the problem that I solved for them, they must truly change their behavior, right?
Yep.
We were briefly chatting earlier, and I told you I'm getting married, and my fiance works in climate change, right? And that's a world where about 25, 30 years ago, we had someone from NASA go to the Congress and essentially say, we at this point have statistically significant evidence that the climate is changing and the temperature in the world is rising. Here's the scientific evidence of that fact. For the last 30 years, these people have been going out to the world and say, the science is clear. The science is clear. The science is clear. And this group keeps getting bigger, right, of people who's going out to the world saying that the science is clear. And yet, people do not behave any differently from what they did. It suffers from, a variety of things. One is called temporal discounting, which means that a result of something that is going to happen 50 years from now, 10 years from now, a year from now, 6 months from now, as big as and catastrophic as that may be, is less important to me in my brain right now than this immediate thing. By the way, if we did not have that, none of us would actually go out and get drunk when we were, young. I learned behavior is different later on, but we know we would not make any bad decisions because the decision in the moment to do this right now seems so much more important than showing up for that meeting tomorrow morning or actually that impacting my career or other things, right?
Yep.
We have the same thing with this climate stuff. The other thing is it's called the enlightenment fallacy, which means that a group of people who, quote unquote, have seen the light, though I don't think climate people have seen the light fully either, because the science also constantly changes.
Right.
But people who think they're onto a truth begin to look down upon other people, whether it is a religious truth. So you basically go and make people feel bad. Hey, by the way, I'm morally superior to you because I know this truth. And unless you actually come onto my side, you're going to be a not so good person. Again, it's the same religious argument. Think about it, that it is in the climate side, right? All of not-for-profit advertising in the climate world is holier than thou. That the world is coming to an end. It is your fault. I am the morally correct person working in this field. So if you want to join our movement and give me money, great. If not, you are responsible for this planet being destroyed. Billions of dollars have been spent getting Hollywood director, Oscar-winning directors, musicians, producing beautiful movies of the world coming to an end. And there has been zero ROI on any of those marketing dollars. Why? Because they do not take into account a basic human understanding. And our work was able to come in, look at 40 different kinds of climate communications in the world, both from the not-for-profit sector and for the for-profit sector, and be able to showcase that this money is being wasted and you actually need to actually change the story arc completely for this to become a more effective strategy. The same thing applies in COVID, during COVID, by the way, when we went out and told people the science is clear, and if you don't take a vaccine right now, you'd be doing yourself a disfavor. That's how we treat it. That did not convert a single person to take a vaccine. The deniers were still the deniers, right? So that's one idea. The same thing appears when when Corona, who's based out of a beach, essentially goes to Chile, to the UK and Canada, and essentially showcases the association between Corona and the beach and a bunch of people going to the beach, and wondering why they're not getting any traction in Canada, only to realize that, hey, by the way, not only is there not an association with the beach to Canada, it actually makes them feel worse because they don't have access to this remarkable tropical paradise that you're showing it to them, creating a withdrawal response from the story. For Corona to then go on to make their first ever winter campaign based on this insight.
Wow. Okay, wait, that is wild. I've never seen a Corona winter campaign, so good on them for not launching in California, but that makes complete sense. Um, I remember hearing on a completely different podcast, and this is a tangent. This was an Aussie CEO talking about how a brand launched a winter campaign in December in Australia and got it completely wrong, because now we both know why. So you do have to figure out how your brand resonates in geography. Okay, that was a great story. That was the climate story. I mean, I resonate, right? We've been living through that for the last two decades, 2.5 decades, and nothing has really changed. It is still the same amount of confusion. Okay, I want to switch gears and talk about some takeaways for the audience, right? So this is an interesting conversation because what we do at Paramark is very sort of quant focused and, in many ways, very short-term focused. And you kind of need to have the short-term focus to allow yourself to also have a long-term focus. And so one of the things that I would love for you to understand is, like, if you are a brand that is spending 50 million, 100 million, 500 million on marketing and advertising, and you could advise the CEO, the CMO, the CFO on the right way of looking at marketing and measurement holistically, what are the components? Like, what's the tool set that you would recommend from your vantage point? Because I think you have spoken to hundreds, if not thousands, of these marketing leaders. So what do you recommend, and what do you pick? What do you leave behind? Where do you double down in that landscape?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say that there is a very specific role for, what you mentioned, right? Like, it's not like it's irrelevant knowing what is useful for what, right?
Right.
When you're in a car and you're driving a car, I would recommend every driver to understand the car that you're driving. The way when you press on the accelerator, the way it reacts, it gives you feedback that needs to intuitively tell you, hey, by the way, when I do this, it's taking a little more for the car to actually get to the speed that I want it to. And by the way, on the freeway, when I'm like, ripping at like 160, it leans left a little bit. Why is it going left a little bit? I need to actually look into that. So there's the both intuitive understanding and the tools to be able to understand. Now, the amount of fuel you have in the car, the speedometer, the indicators, etc., is a dashboard you need in the short run to get the information you need in the moment. And so there's a role for that, and there's a role for that. The problem is that if you think that all you need is on this dashboard, you are not in a great spot. So
What's that analogy?
So yeah, I think as I talk to all the CMOs, first of all, this won't be a very popular opinion, but I actually feel they should shut down their insights departments. Not because an insight is not life-changing, but because anybody who calls a department an insights department should realize that they probably don't understand what an insight is. Yeah. An insight is something that is invisible to you, that you have to dig very deep for. But when you find it, it is so obvious, so obviously the driver of actionability, that it alone can change everything. Yeah. And I always give, this example of MasterCard is a company that processes payments, right? At this point, they'll say we're a tech company. We basically process transactions.
Yep.
And they make money when there are more transactions. Yet they realize that money is not everything. That is the core insight. So they create a campaign that, going to the cafe in the middle of the afternoon in Soho, standing in line, buying a coffee, $7. Meeting, this wonderful person who I begin to have a conversation and going to lunch, another $80. Creating a friendship for a lifetime, priceless. There's some things money just can't buy. That is the truth. That is what this thing is about. But for everything else, there's MasterCard. They didn't change the fundamental truth or insights to fit themselves. They acknowledged the fundamental truth to then find that, but this is my role in your life. And insight is life changing. It has gone on to become one of the greatest ideas in marketing, right? So the current structure of the insights departments is that they're not given enough budget, and they are not meant to be the truffle pigs of the insight that the business needs to transform itself. It has become an insurance policy for a lot of people, to basically be like, I'm a marketer, I'm going to spend money this way, I'm going to give you some money to go validate my ideas. And of course, I'm going to only give you enough money to not use the most cutting edge tools. So now you're going to be budget constrained, and you can never actually truly find the answer to what I actually want. And therefore, I'm going to conclude that this wasn't good enough, or I pick and choose what I want to validate my idea. So at the lack of giving the resources for the core driver of the business, which is an insight, just let them go. And let those people actually do more meaningful things in their life, which they all want to do, but you're not
Right.
what this for. So nothing wrong with the people in those departments. It's the company structure. So the CMO needs to either empower all the people who are going to bring them the insight, and essentially create a value system where, like, this is what I value. I don't really need report after report and data point after data point. I want an insight into human behavior, because that is our currency, that is our edge. So as a CMO, that's the first thing I will sort. Then I should have a phenomenal idea of culture. I'll give you a fantastic example of one of my friends, and I won't name the company because I haven't spoken to him about whether or not this is a valid idea. He's onto his multiple, unicorns that he has started, and comes to me saying, like, you seem to have a lot of wisdom around these ideas. Where do I go get it? And I was like, well, you need to go right now in that particular country in question. There was a revolution going out in stand-up comedy. And I was like, I do not see the media of this country actually doing justice to what the society is going through. I don't see the movies in this country doing justice to what is going on in the society. This rapid growth in stand-up comedy in this universe showcases that they are hitting on a truth at a contemporary level that none of these other people seem to have an understanding of. So forget about the movie stars, forget about the movie directors. Let's get a consortium of 5 stand-up comics who will essentially end up being our marketing engine.
Oh, wow.
It did that, and that was the journey to this unicorn, getting to where it became. So understanding culture, where things are at, and culture is built on mythology, stories, songs, rituals. And unless and until you have, a system that is feeding you bottom up what is going on, and you have a layer to interpret it and figure out how you're going to participate in it, where you have the permission to participate or not, that's the second vertical I'll set. An insight vertical, a culture vertical, and then comes the tactical vertical. The tactical vertical that takes this information and knows, okay, this is how I'm going to pierce the media ecosystem. This is how I will creatively show up. And this is what the persona is going to be when I show up, in that ecosystem. So that's what I would create as the CMO.
That's a wonderful place to kind of bring it all together. I often use this terminology. I was not as well educated as you are in this whole space. So I used to say creative is Batman and measurement is Robin, right? Like, try to reframe the conversation that, hey, measurement is a support function, but if you don't have the right creative, you're lost. And what I think you've just given us is that insight and culture piece is the input into that creative. And
Good.
I love that. That's fantastic. Okay, we have to talk about AI. So, what's fascinating about what you do and the field of AI is that everything in the Transformers paper, the machine learning, the neural nets, they all sort of claim or at least sort of are inspired by the ideas behind how the brain works, right? Like it's supposed to be based on neural nets that's coming from like, neuroscience. But they still kind of fall short of human experience. We all have seen that in our personal experiences. And yet there's a lot of hype about, hey, you can just, run a synthetic survey on ChatGPT or Gemini or take your favorite, tool. And there are literally companies being started to do this synthetic research. What's your take on what's happening there? And do you think that there is a viable path there, or is that a dead end?
Oh man. It's okay. So
You can be frank.
yeah. Of course, big believer, user of AI. But of course, you need to understand what the tool can do for you, what's coming out of it, etc., etc. To believe that I, based on years of asking people questions, which by the way I don't value anyway, right? That's
Yep.
only let's be generous. That covers 10% of all human decision making.
Right.
And that if I'm spending $1 trillion on marketing every year, which is the spend globally right now,
Yep.
that 900 billion of it is being wasted because I'm only accessing 10% of it right now. To say that with about 50, 60, maybe 70% accuracy, that thing is able to mimic what a person would have said had I asked them a question about something that this machine has never experienced, but it's going to project.
Yeah.
Okay. It is still so far away from the real answer. And by the way, for any traditional company that does put out a synthetic answer to what they used to do, tells you how much value they put on their work to begin with.
Fair point.
And so the billions of dollars that they've earned in the past, being these giants, if they do nothing but pivot to synthetic answers, then they've showcased to you how much value they think is in their answers to begin with. So no, I do not think the answers sit there. I think what is magical, which what we're finding, we find ourselves in a very unique position, right? On the largest database of brain activity in the world. We map over 70,000 brains, over 30,000 plus hours of brain activity correlating to video content, millions of imagery, etc. I essentially, much like I said, culture is built on myths, stories, songs, rituals. I have the memories, the relevance, and the emotions of people around culture for the past 15 years. Now, if tomorrow I want to be able to use an artificial generator to tap into a proprietary knowledge database about people that gets me to a deeper level of truth than it would have had I not used it, then for 100% it is worth it, right? If I need to create an ad for McDonald's and I'm like, what are the 5 most memorable burger images in the past 15 years? I actually have that. And instead of, our Gemini, Nano, Banana, whatever the name of the new thing is, which is, now probably the best image generator in the world, wouldn't it be nice for the thing to actually have the input that tells you what works to begin with? In fact, what would invoke people's memories and associations to begin with? Now, that's an added advantage. Now, this is where the two worlds kind of come together magically. But the whole synthetic data piece, I don't buy at all.
Right. So what you're talking about is like, and it comes back to how we talk about context for these LLMs, right? If you have the appropriate context, then it changes the output. And most people don't have the appropriate context. And that's where the failure is, in assuming that the answer without that relevant context is going to make any sense. I completely get it.
If you go back to the 3 verticals around insight, around culture, and around tactics, any proprietary database that essentially gives you value in either one of those verticals, when then applied into your system, will give you the edge. And if the entire game is about finding edge or moat in the market, this is the only place where it sits. And everything else is noise.
Well, on that note, I have to bring it to a close because that was beautiful. I wanted to ask you about sort of your personal story, but we'll maybe cover that at a different time. One question that I like asking every guest, if you could absolutely run any marketing experiment you wanted, no constraints, what would it be and why?
I think marketing is borderline responsible for the remarkable collapse of culture.
Oh, wow.
And it's because we have relegated ourselves to the easiest, most surface level things to engage, to titillate, to convert, to actually get to our month by month or quarter by quarter growth, taking no accountability or responsibility of what celebrating the wrong stories, the wrong heroes does to life and society. Um, I think a huge portion of the reason why we are in an age with highest levels of anxiety, depression, etc., is owed to that. And I warn people constantly that this idea of hyper-personalization, even if successful, essentially leads to complete destruction of civil society because you're eroding the means to create common values. So for me, the greatest marketing campaign I would like to run is to figure out how in this world we get the world to align around common stories with common values, where we get to create the world in the way that we want to, rather than the feeling of exasperation, no matter where you are in the world, with autocrats taking over and controlling societies. If I have unlimited budget, I would go back to the basics of what humanity is, and align people around those ideas, because it will need a marketing campaign of a lifetime, much like you have the greats of the in the Martin Luther Kings of the world, or the Gandhis of the world, or the Muhammads and the Jesuses of the world, if they were ever present as real people, which we believe that they were, or Guru Nanak, who were able to actually lead the world with a core idea around humanity, around love, around responsibility. I think that is the greatest marketing campaign to run, and I'd love to do that.
It's a beautiful answer. Pranav, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. This was amazing. And again, a shout out, if you are looking for a client-facing role, go check out the VP of Client Solutions on Neuro-Insight's website. Go check out Pranav. Go follow him on LinkedIn. I love watching your videos and your posts. And thank you again for sharing all this amazing wisdom with us.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, that was Pranav, CEO of Neuro-Insight. Go check out his work on LinkedIn. He writes there often, also shares poetry there, which I'm a big fan of. So go check him out and tune in next week for another amazing episode.